Welcome to DIBS, a podcast where we dive into the heart and soul of the Windy City. From the towering skyscrapers of the Loop to the pizza debates, from Wrigley Field's ivy-covered walls to Michael Jordan's electric legacy, Chicago isn't just a place, it's home. In each episode, we will talk to those who have helped make Chicago that vibrant, gritty, and extraordinary city we all love. DIBS is presented by Chicago History and hosted by Mallory and myself. Check out the links in this episode's show notes to connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and X.
Today, we have dibs on Anthony Rapp. That name, for some of you, might be synonymous with Rent. Others, like Nick here, it's Star Trek. But I think it was so amazing to have 45 minutes with him. We got to learn so much more about his origin story, how he got into theater and acting, talk to him about his show now that's happening in Chicago. And Nick, I know you're going to be able to go to it. And for me, I obviously grew up loving Rent. I remember seeing the production. I remember seeing also the movie that he was in. But I also, one of my favorite movies is Dazed and Confused. And so to be able to talk to him about that was a lot of fun. And I know, Nick, it was the one episode, listeners, that I let Nick really go for the Star Trek component.
And listen, the truth is, I know deep down, I make a joke during it about the differences in warp engines that they use, but really, I didn't want to get into the nerd side of it. It's important for you, even ahead of the show, for you guys to understand the gift that this is that we put together. For me, I'm so honored that we had Anthony Rapp on. It was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream.
We just have to take a quick second. Anthony is so busy. He has a husband and two small children and is getting ready for his show in Chicago at City Winery. And so for him to really take 45 minutes out of his day is great. And if you're interested in his show, details about tickets and times are going to be in this episode's show notes. Go ahead and purchase. So enjoy this episode.
This week, we got dibs on Anthony Rapp, a tour de force performer who has been acting since the age of 6. Anthony has made a career out of being memorable, from adventures in babysitting to Rent to a legendary X-Files episode to Dazed and Confused. And he was most recently on screen as Lieutenant Commander Paul Stamets, who is one half, in this nerd's opinion, of the most emotionally mature romantic couple in the history of science fiction. Last year, he began touring a one-man show based on his best-selling 2006 memoir, Without You, which recounts the tale of love and loss that is the making of the musical, rock opera, and cultural phenomenon that is Rent. By the way, I personally recommend the audiobook. It is fantastic. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us here today. I know you're going to be performing at City Winery on September 21st, and I'm so glad that you could join us here today on DIBS. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction.
So, Anthony, you grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and I will say I was fortunate enough years ago to see you at Focus on the Arts at Highland Park High School when I was a student there. But can you describe a little of what your childhood was like growing up in the suburbs? And was theater something that your parents enjoyed with you? I know there's a special connection with your mom. What was your entry into that world?
I was born in Chicago on the north side, very near where I'm living now. Moved with my family to Andersonville a few months ago. We lived a little bit in Wilmette. We lived in Glenview. And then when my dad left my mom with, she was a single mother of 3 of us, my brother, sister, and myself, we moved down to Joliet. And that's where I grew up. In Joliet itself, there really wasn't a lot of exposure to the arts. I did have a really good choir teacher in my high school who was very supportive and really cool, but I'd been acting and performing long before I met her. So really my exposure was, I mean, my mom did love the arts. I remember when I was very young, we came to Chicago to see a touring production of The Sound of Music. When I was so young that the ushers were cautioning my mom from taking me into the theater because they thought I'd be disruptive. And then I sat there the whole time and just loved it. But my first forming happened when my mom, who was a nurse, she got a job at a summer camp. My brother, sister, and I attended the camp, go with her because, there was nothing else we could do while she was working. I happened to audition for the musical that summer when I was 6. And the musical was The Wizard of Oz. I got cast as the Cowardly Lion. And I just loved it. And when we came back, we went back the next summer. I did 2 more shows. When we came back to Joliet, the fall after the second summer, I found a local audition for a community theater production of a musical version of A Christmas Carol. So I was probably like 7 or 8 at this point, and I called and scheduled myself an audition, which kind of astonishes me now because I feel like that little 7 to 8 year old me was much more on the ball with like being, self promoting than I am. But that was a great experience. And then I did a lot more community theater, and there were a couple local community theater directors who were so supportive and helpful to give my mom information, to encourage her to take me to Chicago to try to find professional work. That was never anything in the plan. It was never anything that we, and this is pre-internet, so there wasn't easy access to information. There were no reality shows about this kind of stuff. It was purely put one foot in front of the other and see what happens. And I got a professional job pretty quickly. I got my equity card, the Actors Union for Theater, when I was 9. It was the touring production of Evita, which was at what was then called the Schubert Theater, which now it's gone through a couple different names. It's on Monroe. It's where Hamilton played. I don't honestly know what
Cadillac?
no, it's not the Cadillac. That's its own theater. It was a bank. It was named after a bank for a while, but I think it changed its name anyway. It's a touring show, and Hamilton played there, but that's where we did Evita when I was 9. So I got my, I did a play at the Goodman when I was 16. So I have these roots in Chicago that are so much a part of my artistic awakening,
CIBC theater.
CIBC, thank you.
Fact check.
Yeah, thank you. So anyway, I know that's sort of a long-winded answer. My mom was always very supportive, and she loved the arts, and she loved seeing theater, and she loved when I started doing theater, being around the community, being around these incredible people. So yeah, that it was just that. It wasn't any grand plan. It wasn't any kind of like, it was all kind of random, and by the virtue of a lot of good-willed people giving us helpful information and encouragement.
While getting ready for this interview, I was trying to do some of these dates together. Was the touring, you were also in a touring version of The King and I, correct?
Yes.
Was that with Yul Brynner?
Yes. And we toured through Chicago the summer. I did the show for about a year. We toured through Chicago that summer of 82, and we played the Erie Crown Theater, which I don't even know. Do any shows play the Erie Crown Theater anymore?
Yeah, but I believe they changed the name. The last few years after the pandemic has been rough on current live event places.
Sure.
So
yeah,
a lot of them are getting remodeled. But I have to ask you, do you have any Yul Brynner stories from that time in your life? Because I love that man and his ability to act.
Yeah, unfortunately, my Yul Brynner stories are not very positive.
That fits with what I've read.
Yeah, I mean, he was, well, what I can say that is positive is that in the year that I was in the show, he was getting older. We found out later that he was quite ill through at least part of the run of the time that I was doing the show. He was, already fighting cancer. He never let on. He missed some shows, but when he was on stage, he was a workhorse. He gave a great performance every night. But he wasn't very warm and kind. And the biggest story that happened, that was so at the end of this is a spoiler for people who don't know The King and I, but at the end of The King and I, he's dying. The king is dying, and the eye of the show is the school teacher Anna, who I played her son. They become friends, but then they have kind of a falling out, and then he's dying, and she's going to go back to England with me, her son, and she comes back to his deathbed to say goodbye, and it's all this unresolved energy. It's this very bittersweet scene, and at one point in that very bittersweet scene, a boat whistle blows, and 10-year-old me playing Louis, had to run to the back of the stage and say, "Mother, it's the boat." And then there's like this dramatic pause. And then she goes, "Louis, tell him we're not going." And then the king hears this, and then he dies soon thereafter, knowing that she's staying to try to help his children and his country. So it's this dramatic scene, dramatic moment. We were playing these 2,000, 3,000 seat theaters on this tour with Yul Brynner. One night in Nashville, Tennessee, this moment happens. I go to the back of the stage. I say, "Mother, it's the boat." And Yul Brynner on his deathbed turns to me in front of 3,000 people, and he goes, "Louder." And so I paused and said, "Mother, it's the boat again," and then went off stage and cried. I was 10.
Oh man, there's a couple similar stories about SNL when they're having a couple of guest hosts on who do similar things where they just criticize randomly, and it's just, I guess that's how that person lives their life.
I guess, yeah. But
That
but apparently he was, I don't know.
Yeah.
He said he told someone that he thought I was very good in the show. He never, he was very formal and not, like I said, not very warm. But of my many many years in showbiz, that was probably one of the hardest moments I ever encountered. I was a kid, but I bounced back from it and clearly didn't stop me from continuing to pursue a life in this crazy business.
Well, in this crazy business, you have been in a ton of different movies, TV shows. I know Nick is very excited to talk Star Trek with you later on in the episode, but you've been in some cult classics, including Dazed and Confused, which is probably one of my favorite movies. And that cast also, you guys were a lot of unknowns. I heard Matthew McConaughey talk about his experience. What was your experience on that set?
It was a really wonderful experience. Reading the script when I was in the auditioning process, I couldn't quite get my head around like what the tone of it was because Richard Linklater, who wrote it, as you see in the film, it's very slice of life. It's very simple, character driven. It's not like super, plot driven. So I couldn't quite tell what the vibe of it was. But then in the audition process, getting to meet Rick, and then one day we had this whole long casting day where all the different candidates for the roles got brought into LA for a whole day session where we would like mix and match, and they brought pizza, and it was kind of nerve-wracking and weird, but it was also kind of fun. And that's when I really started to go, oh, this guy, meaning Rick Linklater, is special. He's creating a really good vibe that feels very collaborative and easy. And then when I happily got the role, that was the case from the first day of doing rehearsal through the whole every day of being on set. It was he's the kind of director who just says, okay, what do you think? He has very strong ideas himself, believe me. He knows what he wants and he knows, he's not going to compromise that vision, but he's so good at setting the tone for it to be all of us arriving at that together, not any kind of like dictatorship of his vision. And and then he was very open to all kinds of ideas and inspirations that we would bring to it. And yeah, so it was just like a very, very relaxed, very pleasurable, very artistically fulfilling, fun experience. And it was also in Austin, Texas, which is a really cool town. It was really hot, but other than that, I had a great time. And I'm not just saying this because you talked about it so positively, but it is my favorite film that I've done. Like I believe if I'd never been a part of it and I saw that film as a cinema fan, I think it would be my favorite.
I wanted to like be experiencing that. School's out, let's go. They just want to go drinking and like get some Aerosmith tickets and such a slice of life in that age. You've also been in Twister, Beautiful Mind, like all these films. And before we continue, what do you think has been the one that you were shocked most to be in? That like we'll get into
Hmm,
Rent. Rent's a whole separate ballpark,
sure.
but
Well, Beautiful Mind, I'd had a couple auditions that had gone well, and then I didn't hear anything for a long time. And so I'd written it off. There's most auditions, we never hear anything unless we like really ask our representatives to try to get feedback and try to, you almost never know. So I'd been like auditioning for a bunch of stuff and nothing was happening. I was in a bit of a fallow period and I was just a little like getting a little stressed. So I'd written it off, and then I got a call one morning, in the middle of that period where they said they offered me the role. I was like, wow. So yeah, to be a part of that film, even though I had felt good about the audition process, I just didn't never expected it. And I didn't, you just never know going into anything how it's going to be received. And then for it to wind up winning the Oscar and I think it won 4 Oscars altogether. And I will say that the first day we did like a table read, which you don't always get to do in a film or television situation. A lot of times you just come together, you come to set and then you just do the work. You don't get to come together as a cast and sit down with the script and like you do with a play and read it through together and talk about it and, have some rehearsal process. So we did do that with Beautiful Mind. And at the end of that first table read, I was like, I think that Jennifer Connelly is going to win the Oscar, whatever it's worth. I mean, awards are silly in a way. There's any number of brilliant performers and performances that never get any kind of recognition. But at the same time, I was like, she was so good. right away that I was like, she's brilliant in this and she's going to get recognition for it. So that was kind of cool to see that that did happen for her.
A Beautiful Mind comes in a little bit in the later 90s. So that's, you originated the role of Marco in the original theatrical workshop. And like I said, I had the joy of going through and listening to your audiobook. The part where you spoke about Jonathan Larson's death legitimately moved me to tears. With the story of Rent, there's Jonathan Larson's death is a big part of your story in putting Rent on. This many years later, how does it make you feel to know that something he wrote all those years ago and you guys performed in a little theater workshop has this kind of legacy? What does that make you feel?
Oh, I mean, I'm incredibly proud of it. And there's still moments, it's almost 30 years now, where, I mean, Jonathan was 35 years old. He was at the peak of his powers. He had been struggling for, the time that he'd gotten out of college until Rent finally got produced to have his work done on any kind of like real scale. And he was on the cusp of this enormous success. He didn't get to experience it. I've always taken comfort in the fact that he was alive to be at the dress rehearsal, and the dress rehearsal was a great night. Dress rehearsals are not always great nights, but it was a great night. It was a really good performance. The audience really responded so strongly to it, and he was elated afterwards. I mean, he was just like buzzing with positivity, even though he was also not feeling well. And then that night he went home and died. So, but I do take comfort that he had at least maybe a glimpse or a whiff of it. But even then, you know, the critics are fickle. The way that things can be brilliant and still not necessarily be met with success, that happens so often in our business. You know, there's great things that get overlooked and then become cult classics or whatever, but at the same time, he did. I'd like to believe he really had an enormous belief in himself.
It's interesting
He,
that you mentioned that he saw the dress rehearsal, went home, and passed away. It's like the universe allowed him to see his work really come together, and he was able to almost take a deep breath, knowing that he was leaving something that was going to be so impactful behind.
yeah, I'd like to believe that brought him comfort in his final hours. I mean, how could it not have? And at the same time, to then have all of the success that he deserved, come his way when he wasn't there to receive it has been incredibly bittersweet. And, it gets a little, not, I wouldn't say harder, but it just gets, the impact of his loss feels even bigger 30 years later in some ways because of all the work that he didn't do. He was so prolific too. I don't know what he would have done next. I mean, who knows? Any number of artists have like these masterpieces, and then maybe for a while they kind of struggle to find the next thing that they have to say, or then sometimes they have a masterpiece and they launch like into a new masterpiece. I mean, you just never know. But I know that he would have kept working and doing what he loved to do the most, which was try to reflect the world back to us as an artist. So I wish that I could have followed his path as a fan of his, as a friend, and seen what he would have done with the doors that would have opened for him. But at the same time, yes, he's also had this incredible legacy and impacted so many people around the world and inspired so many other artists. I mean, I hear it all the time in these 30 years, how many people are doing what they're doing because of Rent, because of what it did for them. And not necessarily even artists. And lots of people talk about how it changed their lives and made them think differently about what they wanted to do with their lives. Um,
I actually think amongst a certain group of men around a certain age, it did a lot for clearing up the more just accepted latent homophobia that ran through a lot of like male culture. Granted, we're not anywhere near close to dealing with it,
sure.
but having it be such an open and vulnerable emotional play allowed people to feel things and relate to people who were always the other until they saw that play. It's a remarkable achievement. I mean, Jonathan Larson's writing and the score and everything, but everything the actors put into it, it has, it's a transcendent play. It's one of those performances and plays that lives in Broadway history.
Yeah, thank you. And to me, it's such a testament of his role as an ally. Like he was a cishet, HIV negative white guy who saw what was happening in the world around him and decided he had to do something to try to make the world a safer, better, more compassionate place for people who were living on the margins, especially queer people, people of color, and people with HIV and AIDS. And so he did that. He put his money where his mouth was fully, and he's absolutely made a difference to so many people in ways that you mentioned, and lots of other ways too.
You say in your book, and you've said in several interviews, that you love to act and it is your passion, but that your purpose in life is activism. And I'm curious, growing up around here, especially out in Joliet, and advocating for LGBTQ policies, is that something that goes back to your childhood in Joliet, or is that something that came to you only after Rent?
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple like weird little moments in Joliet. Like one day I got bullied coming off the bus, but I don't know if it was because I don't know what it was. I was also like small. I was smart and nerd. I mean, I don't know the reasons why I was walking home from school and I got bashed in the back of the head and my books and papers got thrown. It was not a good moment, but I don't know if it was homophobia or whatever it was, because I wasn't out or wasn't, I was so young, I wasn't even anything at that point. So generally, I think that there's this, I mean, I've always been moved to try to help make the world a safe place for young people in general. And then being in New York, knowing people with HIV and AIDS through my work as a young actor, and then being in New York in the late 80s, early 90s, in the sort of biggest moments of the AIDS crisis, really galvanized me around that activism to try to, in small ways, do what I could to try to help make the world a better place for them. And then, so by the time I got Rent, I was already kind of doing that stuff, and it became a great platform to try to do both at once, be an actor and try to use whatever light was shining on me to try to talk about these issues. And we did things. This was early days of the movement toward marriage equality. I helped get the whole cast to sign an early letter from the Freedom to Marry project, saying that we were in full support of that, when we were one of the first sort of big names of any kind to join that letter. Like that was really meaningful to be in on that kind of stuff. But yeah, overall, I guess it's just sort of hand in hand, I guess. Like my spirit of activism, I think, married well with Jonathan's spirit of activism, which married well with the show itself, which then we were given the opportunities, again, before social media, to talk about it in interviews. And I'd been inspired so much by artists that I looked up to, like Peter Gabriel and Michael Stipe and Annie Lennox and others, who tried to use their platform to try to make the world a better place. So I don't know, I follow in all of their footsteps.
And I understand you're a father of two, correct?
Yes.
So do you feel like now, raising like young people, trying to have them open their minds to the world, do you feel like that activism has gotten a little bit louder?
Well, it feels, yeah, I actually feel in some ways like it's gotten not quieter, but like more specific, if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, like honed in.
Yeah, yeah, like I'm, just by virtue of they're growing up in a household of two dads, and it's a mixed race household, and a lot of our friends are all kinds of different people, and they just started preschool, and it's mostly heterosexual parents, but the kids at this stage aren't necessarily around the parents very much. But it's like a pretty diverse population in this little preschool that we're taking to, as a Montessori preschool. So these things are certainly on our minds, that we're trying to have the world reflect the world that they're living in on a daily basis, be reflective of some of our core principles and beliefs, that we want to be a part of a community that reflects the wide array of what it means to be a human being. And then right now, they're too young, obviously, to engage with some of the bigger questions and themes that we're sort of facing in our country right at this very moment. We're watching all of it very carefully, because we're in a family with two dads, because my husband Ken is the son of immigrants from Thailand, and with all this stuff going on with naturalization, with birthright citizenship, there's it's probably a remote possibility, but there's a possibility that his citizenship could be challenged at some point. What would that do to our children's citizenship? There's different ways that we're that I'm I and we are paying attention to what's happening, and the scope of what we're talking about and thinking about is both broadening and narrowing at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because obviously with you being in Rent, seeing that the HIV and AIDS epidemic and what that time was like and the stress. And now years later, as an older adult bringing kids, we have a whole different kind of epidemic that's happening in a different way and affecting people in such like a different way that you have to kind of think if Jonathan was still with us, would a different version of Rent come out that talks about what is going on in like the culture?
I
It's
mean, I think unequivocally he would have addressed it. He was very politically minded, very activist minded. So yeah, I don't know exactly how he would have tried to tackle it, but I think no question he would have wanted to engage with it.
There's always a focus when we're talking about activism and charity work. It is used to fight something that's bad. We get so focused on the fight that we never celebrate some of the victories. It would be foolish to act as if the activism between Rent, actors, society in general, where the AIDS epidemic was around the time that Rent came out to where we are now. I was wondering if you would mind speaking to the changes that you've personally seen in your life and in your professional life, and what a difference all the activism has made as far as the AIDS crisis is concerned.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest changes that happened with the AIDS crisis, there's a lot of things, but when it first was uh, emerging, it was so stigmatized, like terribly stigmatized, uh, that even in the hardest hit communities, which initially in the United States were the gay community, there was even infighting in the gay community to try to face it and face how it was transmitted. And there had been all this effort to have a kind of sense of liberation, which included sexual freedom, that then when there were activists in the gay community talking about, well, we can have the sexual freedom, but we also have to do it safely, there were those who were like, you're just trying to turn back the clock on everything we've achieved, which it's just incredible. I recommend The Normal Heart, and is a great it's a play by Larry Kramer, who was one of the co-founders of Gay Men's Health Crisis and ACT UP, which were early. Gay Men's Health Crisis, GMHC still exists in New York, but it tells a very personal story of these early days of this fight within the gay community. And then there's a brilliant book that was also done as a HBO series called "And the Band Played On" by Randy Schultz, that talks about all of this stuff, how long it took for there to be any real coalescing of a community response to what was happening. So that was going on. Plus, the Reagan administration was completely ignoring what was happening, not talking about it, even though Reagan himself, as an actor, a former actor, as the former president of SAG, and Nancy, his wife, had any number of friends and colleagues who were sick. They still, there was such silence around it. It was so stigmatized. So all that activism was first to say, we're here, we're dying, find some response, some way to help us. That went on for a while. Then so at a certain point, it started to tip a little bit, so it wasn't quite as stigmatized. I hear stories about like hospitals that were where caregivers were not wanting to treat patients because they were so afraid.
I always remember the Magic Johnson story where NBA players were refusing to play with Magic Johnson because he had tested positive.
Exactly. So then the protease inhibitors, the new medicines that help people with HIV stay healthy longer. That happened like right after Rent debuted in 1996. I believe they started to hit the market in either 96 or 97. That was a whole other sea change, because before the protease inhibitors, which was around when Rent was being written and when Rent debuted, a diagnosis of HIV, being HIV positive, was felt by most people to be a kind of death sentence. And it was in some cases. Sometimes it was, there are certainly longtime survivors who did not die from HIV even before the protease inhibitors. But for many people, you got sick and you died sometimes within months or even a couple years. I had a very young friend of mine who died. He was in his mid-20s and he died in 90, I think it was 96 or 97, 95. So right before the protease inhibitors. He probably would have lived he probably would still be alive if he'd been able to hang on. So those factors, Rent debuted. There were other people like Magic Johnson came forward. I forgot to mention Ryan White. The Ryan White, his story as a hemophiliac straight boy who was ill. It helped broaden the story of yes, this disease first impacted this particular community, but it's a disease. Diseases do not have borders. They do not discriminate. Anyone can get infected with anything. So all of these things over time just helped move the needle. Angels in America, was an important piece of this puzzle. There are many, many, many stories that came through, and storytelling in general is often a way that can help make a difference in people's perceptions, open their hearts and minds, and be a pathway to empathy.
The one of the shows that you were not in was ER, and I'm doing a deep dive rewatch. And it's very interesting how HIV and AIDS is a constant theme throughout the show. And as the show continues, talking about the cocktail, talking about safe sex, and the first person who had it on the show actually was a woman. And even now, like you talking about how it started in the gay community and then kept going. It was interesting because that show was in the 90s and then 20 plus years. You saw how it continued as the education and the technology and all the medications continued to grow, but they kept educating as more information really was coming out, which is important in like television, TV to also educate people.
Absolutely. And one thing about a show that's weekly in people's homes, where people feel a kind of identification to the characters and to the world of that show, absolutely can make a huge difference.
And George Clooney is still pulling her blood, like not worried. So if Clooney can do it, everyone can be okay with it.
All of these things just they add up. They help move the needle. I had the incredible honor of directing a production of Rent in South Africa in, I believe it was 2007. But the South African history of AIDS and HIV is very different from our nation's history. It almost wasn't at all in the gay community there, or if it was, maybe it was to some degree, but it was almost entirely in the straight community. And many, many women were infected with HIV in South Africa. So there's so many that they have a very different historical relationship to the impact of that particular disease in that country.
You mentioned television being invited into your home. Mallory, can I get a thumbs up if I have permission to do my thing?
Go for it. Go for it. I've let you keep it in for so long.
Hey. So the truth is, I am a massive Star Trek fan. And when you talk about television coming into somebody's home, I've been trying to explain to Mallory for a while that Star Trek serves as an inspiration for so many people. And I'm assuming, having been to the conventions, you've gotten almost as many stories about how Rent has lifted people up as Star Trek has. I'm willing to bet there's probably a lot of crossover where people say it's both. I actually wanted to take this chance, though. We've talked a lot about inspiration and everything. And rather than get bogged down in like, how does the spore drive work versus a dilithium chamber matrix? The truth is, 8 years ago, I was very ill. And I would have never had the ambition to dream of interviewing somebody like you today, a main member of the Star Trek cast. And I'm just wondering if there's any stories you can share of people who were close to giving up on their dream and didn't, and it worked out for them. Because I feel like if I can get anything out of my Star Trek fandom in interviewing you today, it would be that message.
Well, one of my favorite memories that I've touched on for inspiration over the years. I can't say that she was ready to give up, but I had the wonderful pleasure of seeing Edie Falco in an off Broadway play in the early 90s. It was like 90 or 91. It was a two character play with this actor that I'd worked with. She was so unbelievable in it. No one knew who she was. She had done, I think, one or two of the Hal Hartley films. So there were a couple people who knew these independent films, her performances. It was before Sidemen. It was before The Sopranos. So we saw this play. She lived downtown. I, met her afterwards because this colleague of mine was in it, and she's like, "Can we share a cab downtown?" So we shared a cab downtown, and she's sharing with me that she doesn't know what she's going to do with herself because it's been really hard, and she can't get an a job. She's like can't get hired, and she doesn't. Even though she was brilliant in this little play, she's having such a hard time. And she was like, again, I don't know that she was ready to give up per se, but she was absolutely feeling like she was pounding her head against the wall. And to hear that kind of vulnerability from this brilliant actress who only a couple years after that was then suddenly one of the most celebrated actresses of her generation, deservedly so. She'd always been that good, and then she got to do it on the kind of scale where she could get the recognition she'd always deserved. I do think of that cab ride and that conversation often in the times of struggle in this business. And we are, however, at the same time living in a very different landscape now than we were 35 years ago. So I wonder if someone like Edie Falco today could get the kind of recognition it would have the opportunities. I don't know. I hope so. Because she was as brilliant in this two character little play as she ever was on The Sopranos.
Sopranos is one of my favorite shows. I do a good rewatch every year. And I don't think I could imagine anyone else besides her playing Carmela and like down to the nails and just like all of that. I do have a Star Trek question too. I did come prepared, Nick. What was it like being the first openly gay character on Star Trek? What did like the weight of that mean to you, knowing that there's fans all over the world that maybe can finally feel comfortable coming out or accepting themselves?
Yeah, it was very meaningful. And I had some inkling of the fan community of Star Trek being, I don't know if it's heavily queer, but certainly there being a big queer component of the Star Trek fandom, because one of my dearest friends is a member of that fandom and he's queer. And he had told me, as a kid, as a young man, how much the queer community in the Star Trek fandom had kind of, coalesced around each other and tried to agitate and advocate for there to be this kind of storytelling in the shows and in the movies, and it just hadn't happened for all these years. So the fact that it happened over 50 years into the history, I was aware of it. At the same time, I was aware of the weight and the momentous nature of it. At the same time, Wilson Cruz, who played my partner in the show and was a friend of mine, I've known him for a long time, who's also a big activist. We both, though, also just wanted to make sure that we were like grounded in the storytelling and grounded in this relationship and just doing our, the most authentic work we could do. And we felt like that would be the way to meet the moment. We didn't have to make like grand gestures, necessarily in the storytelling even. We just had to like just be, authentic, tell the story authentically. So it felt really connected to our hearts as well.
I have to say that I just gotten home from the hospital when the first episode debuted, and it was an amazing thing to have a new Star Trek series come on. And I have to be honest, I questioned the wisdom of having your character initially be a jerk when you don't necessarily know what's going on. And it really did bother me. I was like, you're really going to make the first openly gay character in Star Trek this much of a jerk? By the end of that show, I was so invested in your storyline that the last couple scenes you had made me so emotional. And as somebody who's been through a trauma, I just have to say the care that the show took dealing with your husband, Hugh Wilson Cruz's death on the show, and then trying to rebuild a relationship post-trauma does what Star Trek does so well, which is take something modern and important, put it through the sci-fi lens, and use it to tell people you're not alone in this. And that's, I think, why the queer community was such a big part of Star Trek fandom as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, and all of that was true for us too. And yeah, it's just been very, it's I love that science fiction and fantasy can take these, big personal, emotional, life-altering moments and find a metaphorical way to investigate it that does allow the audience in a way to kind of take the step back, but then also allows them to go in even harder, I think, sometimes, because it's that distance of the fantastical nature of it does kind of let down your guard, I think, a little bit.
And show the ridiculousness of some forms of prejudice. There's always the half
Yeah.
black, half white episode and all
Yeah.
that. I know that we only have you for a little bit of time, and before we get to our 5 questions, I do want to take a second to talk about your show you have coming up on September 21st at City Winery Chicago. I know last year we were touring without you as a one-man show. Is this a version of that show, or is this something completely different?
This is a concert. Without You is really a theater piece, and it's a condensed version of my book that has music in it, but it's a very crafted theatrical evening. This is a concert, and before I did Rent, I had dreams of doing concerts because I've been a huge music fan as well as a theater fan. And after being a part of Rent, being a part of Rent, it was kind of like I got to do both. Like being in Rent was kind of like giving a concert and telling a story at the same time. So happily, in the wake of the success of Rent, I've had these opportunities over the years to do concerts, and it's something that I've really loved doing because there's a real kind of freedom to it. So it's going to be an evening of music that has inspired me, music from shows I've done, music from shows I haven't done, but a lot of it is rock and roll pop stuff. Some of it might be very familiar to the audience. Some of it's just stuff that I like that might be a little more obscure, but I, like to cover it to try to help spread the word about some of these artists and bands. There's even an original song or two in there. And the version we're doing at City Winery is a little more stripped down. It's my longtime friend and music director who was in the original band of Rent, Dan Weiss. He plays guitar and keyboards, and then our other guitarist. So we do like a cool acoustic electric 3 vocalist version of songs that in new ways. And I try to keep it intimate and a varied set list and hopefully some surprises in there. But it's I feel very lucky to get to do this, and I'm very glad and grateful that City Winery is giving. We're doing like a sort of a mini City Winery tour around the Northeast and Midwest and even the South in Atlanta. So it's a really cool opportunity for us to do this.
Actually, one of my questions was going to be, because I noticed you were touring a bunch of different city wineries. Do you have to make adjustments to your performance for each thing? Do you get an idea of how it's laid out ahead of time, or is it because it's a concert, you're pretty confident you walk in, as long as sound check's good, you're good to go?
I think we're pretty good to go. I mean, we have a lot of songs we've done over the years, so it might be fun to mix and match the set list a little bit, but it's also there is, as a theater person, I also do like having the same show to do every night and like rising to the occasion of that show. I don't necessarily need it to have variety to feel fun and exciting, but it might be fun to kind of mix and match a little bit just for, to try different things and see how it goes. But anyway, yeah, so that's probably the biggest question is like, do we change the set list or not from night to night, or like shuffle things around or keep experimenting?
So the final 5, ketchup on a hot dog, yes or no?
Ketchup on a hot dog, yes, but I will say that only veggie dogs. I don't eat meat.
All right. We've been getting that a lot. For as much as people talk about Chicago hot dogs, most of the people are like, no. So,
But I would get ketchup on a hot dog, but I would also do mustard. I would do mustard over ketchup, but I'm happy to have ketchup on a hot dog.
Cubs or Sox? I
Oh,
know the
Cubs.
same. Yeah. You had your own
I don't have
podcast.
anything against the Sox. I really don't. I was very happy when they won the World Series. Like truly, I'm not like an anti-Sox Cubs fan. I mean, as a kid, I went to both parks. I don't remember how many times. I think I went to Wrigley more, but I grew up in a Cubs household, so it just sort of, that's what I've stuck with.
Favorite neighborhood in Chicago?
Well, right now it's Andersonville. I mean, it's fantastic to live here.
Favorite season?
Oh, fall.
Nice. And then lastly, why do you love Chicago?
Well, I didn't even know that this would be the reason until I lived here, but now I love it because there's way more nature and in the city than I ever knew. as a kid coming here to on our street, walking down the street with our 2-year-old and 1-year-old and seeing bunnies on a city street in Chicago is blowing my mind. And there's a nature path like a block away from where we're living. Like that is one of the things I'm really loving. The lakefront, of course, I mean, I always knew the lakefront was great, but it's just like these extra hidden gem, these extra golden situations within the city has been a real gift.
Well, thank you so much. It's lovely to be able to speak with you again. I remember hearing you speak when I was back in high school. I know Nick was really looking forward to talking to you, and we just really appreciate you, and you're still an activist, so thank you.
Honestly,
Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you've moved back to Chicago. That made me smile when I found that out. I was not able to learn that in the research. So I hope you being back here is everything you wanted it to be with you and your family, and I hope it's treating you very well.
It is already, and I'm sure it's going to only get better from here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
This has been a presentation by Chicago History. Intro music is by Ryan Nichols, and our cover art is done by Jake Waxman. Please remember to subscribe, rank, and review, and thank you for joining us on DIBS.